Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of the RP1 series. We currently have a Venus transfer window rapidly approaching. We already have multiple rockets being built. But first, I'll head into R&D. We need 1964 orbital rocketry to launch Gemini. So I'm going to unlock 1963 orbital rocketry, so that later we can unlock 1964 orbital rocketry. But now, the first Venus probe of this episode is ready. We need to warp until it's the specific time of day so that we can launch into the correct inclination orbit. But after that's done, we can fire up our engines and get underway. Second stage ignition. Oh, it looks like only one of the RL-10s ignited. Because of this, we didn't have enough thrust to make it to orbit, and we fell back into the atmosphere. But that's okay, because we can always try again. This time ignition went well, and we made it to orbit. After ditching the transfer stage, I made sure to deorbit the Centaur for the sake of the solar bears. And before I knew it, it was time to burn for Venus. After the burn was done, I made sure to make up any velocity with RCS before I could deploy the satellite and deploy the solar panels. Back at the Space Center, I'm going to pop into Mission Control and pick up a contract. I think I'm actually going to pick up this Mars flyby contract. I think we'll be able to do it quite soon. And I think I'll also pick up this Tundra Orbit satellite contract. It's just an easy one that we can do. And back in R&D, I'm going to pick up the last stuff we need for Gemini. Most notably the 1964 orbital rocketry, which unlocks the engines, and early landing, which contains the heat shields for Gemini. And in the VAB, this is Alpha 3, our new launch vehicle. It's our equivalent of the Titan II. This rocket runs on hypergolic propellant instead of kerosene. I'm going to tool the rocket for 50K, and then I have to go through and unlock some of these engines, because these engines run on hypergolic fuel instead of Kerolox. I've also stretched out the upper stage in this design to match the diameter of the bottom stage. This way we can actually attach the Gemini capsule to the top. But now, it was time for yet another launch to Venus. If something went wrong with our first probe, I wanted to make sure I had a backup so that we would get science from Venus in this transfer window. And after deorbiting the Centaur, I was ready to burn for Venus. Agena ignition looks good. And Emprise 4 was on its way to Venus. And now it's time for the final interplanetary probe. Emprise 5 will not be going to Venus. It's going to Mars. We should be able to get to Mars with the exact same setup as the Venus probes. Here I am plotting a rapid encounter to Mars. A normal trajectory out to Mars would be too long and we wouldn't have communications by the time we got there. So we have to do something a little special to be able to get there in under 200 days. To get there quickly, we have to launch into this strange inclined blue orbit that you see. The reason for this is that when we eject from Earth around the Sun, we can only intercept Mars at an ascending or descending node. So we have to launch into this inclined orbit to drag the ascending or descending node around in order to get an encounter earlier on. Therefore, we won't be launching perfectly east, but rather slightly southeast. Also, I didn't have high hopes in this probe making it, especially with our early RL-10s. And it didn't really matter if we didn't make it because we'll have better tech for our next transfer window. But the RL-10s performed perfectly, and they carried us all the way to orbit. And to a pretty strange orbit at that, 350 by over 400 kilometers. Luckily that means the burn to Venus won't be nearly as long. And after deorbiting the Centaur, it was time to fire up the Aegina. After spinning up the satellite and deploying the solar panels, Emprise 5 is on its way to Mars. But to finish off the episode, we're going to launch a few communication satellites using our new all-hypergolic Alpha 3. For this mission, we need to have a periapse of over 1,000 kilometers at the South Pole. So, I set our apoapse to well over 1,000 kilometers so that when we get there, we'll be able to burn and reach the proper orbit. Conveniently, I was also able to deorbit the Aegina. Now it's time for the final launch of the video, yet another communication satellite, on yet another Alpha 3. Alright, now it's time for our final burn to place us into the correct orbit. Oh crap, looks like our engine failed to ignite. So I'm going to destroy the probe, as there's no way it's going to make it to orbit. Luckily, we can just build another rocket.
No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. And now, if America's new spacecraft succeeds in reaching Venus, we will have literally reached the stars before midnight tonight. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.